Yo, what's going on, guys? Mike from Mike Talk Sports. So going into this Saturday's UFC fight night, not a lot of big names on this fight card, not a lot of big storylines on this fight card, but I'll be honest, I'm expecting some absolute bangers out of this fight card, one of which including is going to be Jim Miller versus Alexander Hernandez. And when I looked at the odds for this fight, I was absolutely shocked. I was fully expecting Jim Miller to be not only a favorite, but a considerable favorite, like a minus 200 favorite. And when I looked at DraftKings, Jim Miller's plus 190. He's plus 800 to get a knockout in this fight. And Alexander Hernandez, a guy on a 2-loss fight streak, is minus 225 odds. Absolutely insane. Here's why I think Jim Miller is going to upset Alexander Hernandez. So Alexander Hernandez is a guy who came onto the fight scene with a lot of potential. He was a guy who could fight at either 145 or 155. He has a very strong, very nice frame, very nice physique, and he's a guy who holds a lot of power. Early on in his career, he was known for getting a lot of first-round finishes, second-round finishes, because of how explosive he comes out of this fight. He's a guy who has a wrestling background, but kind of uses those level changes more of feints and kind of fakes, rather than to offensively initiate grappling sequences. He has pretty solid jiu-jitsu, but I think at this point, I think it's pretty obvious that Alexander Hernandez's offensive wrestling is kind of below average, to be completely honest, especially when you match up a guy like Jim Miller, who's proven throughout his career to have pretty good offensive wrestling and even better offensive jiu-jitsu skills. Jim Miller's a guy who he stuns you with a 1-2 head kick. He's going to pull guard. He's going to pull guillotine, and he's going to submit you in that way. That's exactly what he did against a guy like Clay Guida, who Clay Guida is a really tough guy to finish. So Jim Miller has that grappling advantage in this fight. He's a better wrestler than Alexander Hernandez. Jim Miller really came through the ranks as a dominant high school wrestler, a dominant college wrestler. Then he fell in love with jiu-jitsu. Then he fell in love with kickboxing. Then he started MMA, whereas Alexander Hernandez kind of went straight from wrestling. Then he started training straight into MMA, so he doesn't have that extensive Jim Miller wrestling background. So really, the story of not only this fight, but Alexander Hernandez's career in general is that cardio, is that pace. He's a guy who comes out and he's going to completely empty his tank in the first round. He's going to have that crazy adrenaline dump. I remember 2 fights ago, I was going, oh my God, Alexander Hernandez is a guy who looks like he can beat some top 15 fighters right now. I mentioned that 8-fight win streak he went on. He beat Beneil Dariush via KO in the first round, guys. He beat Beneil Dariush, who is about to fight for a title. I realistically think Beneil Dariush fights Islam Makhachev for a title in 2023. I fully expect that to happen. So you're looking at Alexander Hernandez having a 41-second KO on a guy who might be the champion of the 155 division going into 2024. That's absolutely insane. That's what Alexander Hernandez is capable of. He's capable of knocking out any guy at 155, at 145, out in the first round, but that's his issue. He goes for that first round knockout. He's a guy who's going to start off on the balls of his feet, bouncing around in that nice boxing orthodox stance. He's going to throw out a couple jab straights, then he's going to wing those hooks to the body, wing those overhead rights, wing those overhand lefts, and just go for the finish. And the issue stylistically with doing that against a guy like Jim Miller is damn near impossible to put out, especially on the feet. Jim Miller is a guy who's barely gotten knocked out in his entire career. The last time Jim Miller, a very active fighter with a lot of fights, the last time he got knocked out, guys, was 2018, and he got knocked out against a prime rising Dan Hooker. When Dan Hooker was in his very prime, the very tip top of his career, I think Dan Hooker's fallen off, I'll be honest, with all of these Islam Makhachev accusations, which very well could be true, very well could be false. I just think Dan Hooker's completely fallen off at this point, regardless of that situation. But Dan Hooker in 2018 was an absolute killer. The thing about that Dan Hooker knockout against Jim Miller, it's not like he knocked him out with a punch. Didn't knock him out with a kick. He knocked him out with a perfectly timed knee. And to me, when you knock out a guy with a perfectly timed knee, that's not the guy's chin breaking. That's just being hit with something that you cannot recover from. You get hit with a bomb of an elbow, a bomb of a knee. I mean, that's like getting a knife sliced right through your skull. So you can't really control that. Jim Miller is a guy who, with traditional strikes from a 1-2 head kick from Alexander Hernandez, from an overhand right, I think he scrambles. Let's say he gets knocked down, gets knocked out for a second. He's going to roll. He's going to pull guard. He's going to work his jiu-jitsu off his back. He's going to shoot a guillotine. He's going to do something creative. My official prediction for this fight, I think Alexander Hernandez, like he does in every single fight, he's going to have a really good round one. He's going to look good for the first minute of round two. But I think Jim Miller is going to, in the late second round, early third round, or mid-third round, he's going to stun him, he's going to pull guard, or he's going to wrestle him. He's going to take him down to the ground, and I do think he finishes him by submission. I think this is either going to be a submission victory or a decision victory for Jim Miller. 30-27s or 29-28s on the scorecard.